This is an amended agreement between the parties to provide for a reciprocal public access for safety over the JCC property and over the residential development property. So it's reciprocal in that sense.
Okay, so reciprocal means thumbs up?
Both sides. In other words, it benefits both sides, both parties.
Great.
Okay, so do you have an area designated already?
Yes.
You can be able to show that?
Yes, we'll show that. We have an exhibit.
Great. Well, thanks for working on that. It's great news. And the last thing, in bigger cases, I just kind of go back and I watch the YouTube video to kind of find out where we left things off. At the 29-minute mark of our last meeting, you had mentioned that this property in the 1990 master plan was zoned for multifamily, and I was a little surprised by that. So I reached out to Catherine Sarmat, our planner, and I said, could you kind of look into this and see what Mr. Coakley meant by this? Because I always thought this was an R40 or, at least a residential zone.
It's R40 zoned. It's just that the master plan back in 1990 talked about perhaps using properties in this area for multifamily use.
Okay. Hi. What are your thoughts?
I didn't necessarily, I think what the statement that was made at the last meeting was that the 1990 master plan made recommendations related to utilizing the property as multifamily. That's not as I read the master plan. The master plan actually in the land use element included specific study areas along in the foothills, and it sectioned it off. There's 4 or 6 different study areas, of which this property was included in study area C of that, which was the boundary was the north, the PSE&G transmission lines, the south was Talamini Road, the east was 202, 206, and the west was 287, which was the boundaries. It went beyond this property, but it was generally that area. The master plan change included in that study area said no master plan change is recommended, and it said retain existing low-density residential zoning. There were other sections of the master plan that talked about the Route 202-206 corridor more generally and talked about how properties should be looked at, but that was outside of the study area of which this property was included. So the specifics of that study area did not include this property, as I read.
This has been zoned residential since 1990?
Yes, this has been R40. Throughout the 1990 master plan, which is the last comprehensive master plan, it includes a lot of indications that the foothills area shouldn't see any recommended zone change as far as the residential character. That should continue to exist as a low-density residential area in the township.
I just wanted something on the record to clarify it.
All right, well, my planning expert will be here later this evening, and I'm sure he'll address that. And I may have misspoken in terms of overstating what he was saying, but there was some indication that the 2026 corridor could be changed to multifamily use. I think that was the point I was hoping to make.
Fair enough. Thank you for letting us get these points in, and please, all yours.
Okay, thank you. So as indicated, we're here tonight on behalf of 821 Bridgewater LLC, as well as the Jewish Community Center of Somerset, Hunterdon, and Warren counties, regarding a 15-acre property along Route 202, 206 southbound between that roadway and the existing JCC facilities, which adjoin Route 287 north. This is a bifurcated application. I'm sure you remember some of those discussions. That means that we're seeking the variances that are within the jurisdiction of the board, the use variances. If the board grants those variances, we would come back to the board for the bulk variances and the site plan approval and subdivision approval that would implement these variances. And the whole reason for that is there is an effort to maintain the ability of an applicant to seek the principal variances that they need without spending an enormously more money on this application until those variances are granted. So that's why we're here in that limited sense. But turns out we've provided a lot of information, and we've addressed all of the issues that were raised at the last hearing. So just to refresh your recollection a little bit, we had Laura Friedman, who's the executive director of the JCC here. She testified at the last hearing about how the JCC operates, the people it serves, the extensive community outreach that it has, and basically told us how important it is to the community. And as I think pertinent here for your consideration, this may be the only opportunity the JCC gets to expand their area of operation by this unique arrangement that has been made by someone buying the 15 acres and then conveying the 3 acres back to the JCC. So that's an essential thing, I think, to remember when you consider this. The JCC uses are permitted in the R40 zone, except they must be on a roadway that's designated in the zoning ordinance, and in fact, it's not on one of those roadways. So we need a use variance for this activity by JCC on their property. You could look at this use variance both as a pure use variance under D1, you could look at it under D2 as an expansion, or D3 as satisfying a condition of the ordinance. So there's a lot of grounds for the JCC variance, both legal grounds and factual grounds. And we hope you consider those as you hear the rest of the case. We will also present again Mr. Robin Michello, the PE for the project. You'll remember, I think, that Mr. Michello testified at some length previously. He left with a laundry list of items that he should investigate. He has investigated them all, and we've presented some revised plans and other information about the project. If you look in your package, there was a letter from Mr. Michello dated October 11th, 2024, which outlined the various items he's looked at and changes to the plans made during that period of time. One of the big changes is that the size of the project in terms of residential units has been reduced from 64 to 60, and this allows the setback from the residential house on the property that the JCC intends to maintain. It allows the creation of that setback. So that's an important attribute of change that's been made since the original hearing, and that was in response to comments from the board. We have also, as I indicated before to Mr. Foos, that we have reached an agreement with the JCC regarding a emergency access easement, which would be in the southerly end of the 3 acres that will be conveyed to the JCC, and it will hook up with the driveway from the JCC property, and it will also allow, if there was ever a need for emergency access from the JCC property onto this development, and would allow the emergency folks to get out to 202. So that's a big step forward with respect to the application. One of the issues, I think Mr. Foos, you raised it, was to have a soil report, which we have, and you wouldn't believe sometimes how hard it is to find people doing soil work now. They're very busy. But we did, and we have a soil report. It's been transmitted to the board, and Mr. Michello will testify about what the soil report means. So that has been done as well. I would like to clarify one thing that I did, and that was I wrote a letter to the board about what it means to have a 55 and over project. And I think my letter was accurate in that it says that you have to have one person who's 55 and over for 80% of the units, which authorizes 20% not to have a person 55 and over. But that's not our intent here. Our intent here is to have no 20% exception. So every unit will be occupied by at least one person 55 and over, and there will be no under 18 children allowed in the project. So that's something that I didn't state in my letter. I should have, but that's the plan here, and you can condition this approval on that type of activity. Let me see if there's anything else. So I think that's pretty much it as far as a recapitulation. We have 3 witnesses tonight. We have Mr. Eric Keller, who's our traffic engineer. He'll be followed by Rob again. Will be back kind of testifying about the matters that are listed in that letter. And then finally, if he arrives here from another testifying situation, that would be Mr. Steck, who will come in and give the planning testimony. We're hopeful he'll arrive by about 8:30, but keeping our fingers crossed on that one. That's our plan for the evening. If there's no questions, I'll call Mr. Keller.
All right, Ed, just make sure everybody's sworn in and
What?
from there.
I'll swear in Mr. Keller when he comes up. I think we did everyone initially, but let's do him again as he comes up. Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give to this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
I do.
Mr. Keller, would you state your qualifications in the field of traffic engineering to the board?
Certainly.
Let's get the wireless mic. There should be a email floating around. Thanks.
Yeah, I got this one. Eric Keller, Bowman Consulting Group. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey since 1987. I have prepared traffic studies for a variety of different projects, residential, commercial, throughout the state and other states. I have appeared in Bridgewater before, but it was before the planning board. I don't believe I've appeared before the zoning board, but I have been qualified in many municipalities throughout the state as well as Superior Court. My license is in good standing and current.
Great. The board certainly accepts you as a traffic expert.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Keller, did you prepare a report on this matter?
We did. Our original report was dated January 29th of 2024, which included traffic counts, an assessment of the existing and future conditions without the project and with the project. Based upon comments that we had received from the board's traffic consultant, Mr. Fishinger, we revised our report and submitted an amended report that was dated October 29th of this year. And really the main difference in that was we utilized NJDOT traffic counts from February of 2020, which will remind everybody, if you haven't forgotten, was before COVID. Traffic volumes have continued to be below those standards. So, and in fact, the traffic counts for DOT were 33 to 38% higher than the counts that we performed in January of this year.
And you just mentioned that report dated October 29th. I think you meant to say October 9th.
Oh, did I? You were correct, October 9th. Yeah, let's keep the record straight and have the right date.
So what roadways were you principally interested in?
So
We're going to need, Mr. Coakley, if you would speak into a microphone.
What roadways were you principally interested in this study?
So our primary focus, obviously, is Route 202, 206, which is the access that this development is being proposed to. We also looked at the next intersections, both to the north and to the south, which is Foothill Road with West Foothill Road, and to the south, Talamini Road, which is a signalized intersection.
And what determination did you make as to the efficacy of traffic on those roads if this project were to be built?
Certainly. What we found, first, we determined what the peak hours were. When we do a traffic study, we're looking at that 60-minute period when traffic is highest during the weekday peak hours, an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon. And we found from our counts that peak hour was from 8 to 9 a.m. and from 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. And what we found is that both of those intersections operate at an acceptable level of service. Levels of service range from A, which is minimal to no delay, to F, which has a lot of delay, congestion. And what we found, and that all of the intersection approach movements operate at level of service D, as in David, or better. The DOT, in their State Highway Access Management Code, which will govern the site access for this, in addition to the board's jurisdiction, finds that level of service D is an acceptable level of service along a state highway and does not require any mitigation measures to be implemented. And that's the existing intersections that we studied. We found when we looked at the DOT traffic volumes as well, that those same levels of service were achieved as consistent with what we found based upon our counts in January of this year. We then, standard practice in preparing a traffic study is we look at what will the traffic conditions be in the future analysis year when this project is anticipated to be constructed and occupied. We selected the year 2027 for that future analysis year because when we did our original count, we applied background growth factors, which is a standard practice for DOT and other jurisdictions, that we look at what growth is going to occur in the region as a whole. Because Mr. Fischinger had asked us to use the pre-COVID traffic volumes, which, as I said, 33 to 38% higher than what you find out there today. We did not apply a background traffic growth rate because those volumes are already well in excess of what we found out there today from our counts. But what we did do is that we added other specific projects that have been approved in the township. Those projects were identified in conjunction with Mr. Fischinger. That includes the Petersbrook Innovation Center, the reoccupancy of 3 existing office buildings to the south of us along Route 202, 206, and also a proposed manufacturing facility located at 721 Route 202, 206. So we added the traffic from those 3 developments, and I'm going to lump the existing office buildings all together. And we added the traffic from those developments onto the highway network, and again analyzed the operations of those 2 intersections without our project being in place. And what we found, again, there were only some minor changes in the level of service during both peak hours, but all of the approach movements using the highway capacity software that we use to analyze operations all remained at level of service D or better. We then look at what is the incremental impact of, in this case now, 60 age-restricted townhomes on those intersections, and how does the site intersection operate? Our original study obviously was based on 64 units. With the latest change, that was reduced to 60. Now, we have also used, let me take a step back. The Institute of Transportation Engineers, the ITE for short, publishes a document called the Trip Generation Manual. We're currently using the 11th edition. DOT, because we're on a state highway, still uses the 10th edition. We used DOT data for our trip generation. The 10th edition has actually higher volumes for this type of residential use than the 11th edition. So again, it's a conservative approach. And we also used standard, the rates for a non-age restricted, what they call low-rise multifamily residential, which is what a townhouse is. We did not take any consideration of the fact that these being age restricted, there might be different travel characteristics of the age restricted units. We wanted to be conservative, and we used this as if there was no age restriction, just using standard ITE rates. So it's a conservative approach, in my opinion. That data is contained in Table 2 of our report. And what that data shows, and this is published data from similar type uses throughout the country that is accepted by the DOT and by all the agencies that we work with. And what that found was during the morning peak hour, there would be 35 peak hour trips from this development. 8 of those would be inbound into the site, 27 would be outbound, leaving the site. And in the PM peak hour, there would be 41 trips, 26 entering the site and 15 exiting the site. And in accordance with the DOT and the ITE and other publications, traffic or projects that generate less than 100 peak hour trips are not considered significant when it comes to assessing the impacts of traffic. Regardless, we looked at what the operations of this would be on the existing intersections and as well as the site driveway. Yeah.
Okay. So let me just ask you one question. The chairman raised a question last time about whether it would be safe to ingress and egress the site. Did you look into that specifically?
Yes, we did.
What did you find?
Couple things. One, when we look at the operating characteristics, the level of service that would occur at the site driveway, and this is contained in Table 3 of our report, the driveway would operate at level of service C, which is a very good level of service along a principal arterial like Route 202, 206. This site, because we have located the driveway opposite the existing veterinary hospital driveway, which already has a southbound left turn, excuse me, we're anticipating and we're planning on the DOT requiring us to have what I call an opposing left turn lane for northbound traffic. So the left turns into the site will be separated out from the through movements going northbound, which creates a safe haven for those vehicles wishing to make a left into the site. We also...
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but would you go over that last part again, how we've got opposing left turns and how it's going to make it safer? I didn't follow you.
Okay, I'm sorry. There's an existing, if you've been by the site, if you go to the vet hospital, there's a left turn lane. Like there's a left turn lane at Foothill Road. So if you're in that left turn lane waiting to make a left, you're out of the through traffic. So somebody coming...
This is coming north to south.
This is north to south.
And you would be making the left into the veterinary, which I've been there many times.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry you've been there a lot.
I counted for you. I've been there 47 times. So I can talk about that.
All in one day?
Well, I pulled all of my insurance claims with Trupanion. So we'll talk about this more, but I've been there 47 times. I'm not nearly your qualifications, but I have a lot of experience in this facility. But for Mr. Kulak, you're driving north to south on 202, 206. To make a left in the veterinary hospital, you have your own lane?
Correct.
All right, and then...
So what we're going to do is we're going to create a striped out left turn lane so that when you're coming from the south to the north wanting to make a left into this proposed development, you'll also have a separate lane and you won't have somebody behind you who wants to continue straight. You'll be separated from the through traffic on 202, 206, just like the other intersections that as you come south now. So you'll be out of the main flow of through traffic.
Thank you.
And it was your testimony, you think that the New Jersey DOT is going to require traveling south to north, that there would be a left-hand turn lane added in addition to the veterinary lane on the opposing side?
Correct, because there's enough room in the existing pavement of the roadway. Because there's already a left turn lane coming southbound, they'll want one going northbound for this development because it's already striped out. Right now, Mr. Chairman, as you well know, if you were in that left turn lane and you look across, you see that there's a painted median there that then tapers back to just one lane in each direction headed north and south. So that would be restriped to create a left turn lane, and then there would be a taper beyond that.
And the DOT could require you to do nothing, right?
They could, but I've dealt with the DOT for a lot of years, and they're going to want a left turn lane because there's one for southbound traffic.
Would they take your recommendation on this? Or is this something they would require of you?
I'm not sure I follow.
It sounds like you're recommending that this lane be added.
My recommendation is yes, it should be added, and I think the DOT will agree with that.
Okay.
And even if I didn't recommend it, they would say you need to put a left turn lane here.
And it's wide enough to accommodate both of these lanes?
Yes, sir.
And southbound?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
A quick question.
Yes.
You know the distance between the traffic light and where you plan to put the opening to the development?
The Talamini traffic light?
Yes.
I don't know off the top of my head what that distance is. It is beyond the frontage of our property, there's the corner lot and I believe 2 or 3 other lots beyond that. It is a fair distance between. I don't have an exact distance.
Mr. Chairman, I can probably just help. Based on a quick measurement, it's about 1,000 feet between the signal at Talamini and the veterinary driveway.
Thank you, Mr. Kissinger.
So
Thank you.
if there's a red light on the north to southbound traffic, how many cars would back up to block, would be there to back up to your entrance? In other words, how many could it handle, that particular traffic light?
Well,
1,000 feet?
I mean, 1,000 feet, that would be, assuming 25 feet per vehicle, which is conservative, would be 40 vehicles. But when we looked at the level of service for the southbound through right movement at Talamini, that operates at, I'll tell you in a second. Southbound, it operates at a level of service B in the morning and C in the afternoon. So there would not be that kind of a backup. You know, it would be a couple of vehicles at any given time.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
How does your striped median impact somebody leaving the development looking to make a left turn to go northbound on Route 202, 206?
It wouldn't impact them at all because you already have the southbound left turn. So when they came out of the site, they would cross over the southbound lane, cross over the southbound left turn lane, and then make the left to go north towards Foothill Road and towards Pluckerman.
We've heard from residents at the previous meeting that making a left turn, for example, from West Foothill Road, which is not, there's no traffic signal there, it's slightly north of the veterinary clinic.
Yes.
Is very difficult, if not impossible, to do at the peak hours. So now I've got new people coming in, pulling out of the age-restricted development, looking to make a left turn. They cross the median, and they're trying to go north, but the line of sight, it seems to me, is pretty limited, because there's almost a curve that you can't see.
Glad you brought that up, Mr. Clark. I was just about to get to that. And we haven't specifically looked at West Foothill Road. I know clearly where it is. we did count that intersection. But what we did because we understood that there were concerns and valid concerns about safety, is we did two things. One, we filed an OPA request with the township to get accident records within this stretch of roadway for a period from, give me a second. January 1st of 2020 up until September 9th of this year. We picked September 9th because that's when we filed the OPA request. They came back with, there were only 2 accidents in that over 4-year period in the vicinity of the vet hospital. And they were because people weren't paying attention. They were distracted, they ran into somebody. It was not because of roadway conditions or anything else. It was driver error. The other thing that we did, because you mentioned sightlines, in conjunction with Gladstone Design, the civil engineers, we put together a sightline profile. And we did it twice. Because when I do this, I base the sight distance on stopping sight distance. Stopping sight distance is that a vehicle approaching the intersection has enough time to stop their vehicle in case somebody stops dead in the middle of the road leaving the site. Mr. Fishinger asked us to look at intersection sight distance. And the difference is intersection sight distance is the distance that I can see that vehicle approaching, if somebody pulls out, that vehicle approaching from either direction doesn't have to slow down when they see a vehicle coming out of the highway. So we reran the analysis, we did profiles, and from our site driveway, we satisfy the intersection sight distance in either direction. And I know the people, I was here at the last meeting, on West Foothill, that crest in 202, 206 is just, I shouldn't say just, it is north of West Foothill, but it is more than 670 feet from our intersection. The 670 feet is the distance that a vehicle travels at a design speed of 55 miles an hour, and because that stretch of 202, 206 is downhill, it takes more for a car to stop, so that sight distance extends even further. So it's a very conservative approach in looking at it, and we have more than adequate sight distance from our site driveway. And really, it's the same thing. When you're pulling out of the vet hospital, you have that same view of the highway. You're just on the other side of the road. And I think that's backed up by the lack of an accident history from the vet hospital.
In your opinion, the new development, should it take place, people pulling out, making that left turn, it's going to be something they can do safely.
Absolutely.
And that does not, however, speak to the challenges faced by the residents of West Foothill.
Unfortunately, that road is located that much closer to the crest, and they have a much shorter period of time in which to view traffic headed southbound, and that creates issues.
And the traffic generated by your development, as you made all your assumptions and looked at all the tables, was, I'm going to say, incidental to the experience that people have pulling out of West Foothill?
That's correct. That's a very good word to use, is incidental, nominal. It is, and I think we've taken a conservative approach in that, we haven't treated this as an age-restricted community. We've treated it as just a regular, anybody can live there, so.
Eric?
Oh, I'm sorry.
What do you mean by that comment?
Well, age-restricted community, you have people that may be retired, may be working, part-time, or making their own hours. They may be snowbirds. They live here in New Jersey part of the year, and another part, they're someplace else. So
I'm 53. In 2 years, my driving habits are going to be different?
that's why that's exactly why
There are some exceptions.
I'm 65.
All right.
I'm still working. I'm still going to meetings at night.
Me too.
And, but I don't necessarily, and this has nothing to do with my age or anything. There's days I don't go to work. I mean, I don't go to the office. I do go to work. I just sit in my house and work.
Now you've thoroughly confused us all. So your comment about 55, why don't you answer Mr. Aller's question?
55 and over is just that the demographics, the travel patterns of the people that can be in that community may be different, but because I can't guarantee that, Mr. Aller and I can both be living in there and we're still working. So we treated it as if there was no age restriction. So
I have some questions on that. So are you suggesting people only travel to go to work? I mean, what about grocery store, running errands? I mean, did you evaluate that? Do you have real data to show?
well, that's what we look at, the peak hours. We look at, for residential projects such as this, we look at the commuter peak hours. So we're looking at the highest volumes on the roadway and assuming that people are, based upon the ITE data, are leaving their homes at that time and entering the roadway. I'm not saying that people aren't traveling during other hours of the day, whether it's age restricted or not, but the volumes on the highway are lower than the morning and afternoon commuter hours. Certainly on a road like 20206, which is very much a commuter route.
Okay, and you have data to prove that.
As far as,
As far as 55 and older communities travel off peak hours.
let's put that aside. I didn't analyze it as a 55 and older community. All I'm saying is that it's likely, in practice, this community gets built, we go out there and count how many people are leaving during the peak hours, and I bet it's going to be less than what we see here, what I've analyzed. But I didn't do any of that because I didn't want to have this kind of a debate. Well, what was that based on? Have you done studies of other age-restricted communities? So we didn't use that. We used standard data for a non-age-restricted community.
Okay, so it could be conservative or maybe not conservative. You don't know.
Well, I think it will be, but we analyze it based on the data available for a townhouse community.
Right, and then regarding the COVID, and changes in society, how people work. I mean, we can't say if, I don't think you can say if it's conservative or not conservative. I mean, do we know if those are transient or do we know if those are permanent, people's travel patterns? I mean, what would be your thoughts on that?
Well, all I can say is we used, at Mr. Fishinger's request, we used the DOT data from February of 2020. And when we analyzed the two intersections using that data for 202, 206, it confirmed the levels of service that we found based upon our counts that we did in January of this year.
Okay.
So whether there's travel patterns or not, we've done a lot of traffic studies since the pandemic has eased, and travel patterns have returned to what we see every day now. And when we compare them, when we've done studies, traffic counts in the same location in 2024 and compare it to what was in 2019, any time before the pandemic, the couple of years before the pandemic, they are always less than what we used to have. So that has been borne out. You can ask Mr. Fishinger, I'm sure he's seen the same thing. But the bottom line is because we've used the traffic volumes from February of 2020 and the results have not changed, I think that validates and supports our finding that these intersections operate safely and that this site driveway will also operate safely.
Let me,
I have a question.
For an age-restricted community?
There is.
You don't have any of that?
Well, I don't like to use it for the reason that Mr. Aller asked the question of, well, how do we know that that's what the demographics are going to be for this? You know, I've done traffic studies for a lot of years. I've stood before a lot of boards, and I probably shouldn't even have brought it up because we get into this debate, well, how do you know what that age-restricted community is going to be like? People, you know, don't travel out. So I don't even do it anymore because I'd rather use the base data and not have to explain, well, why'd you pick that number?
Maybe it could be more.
No, data, you know, bears it out.
I need a little clarification here. So if I understand you right, the study you did was for during peak hours,
Correct.
correct? I don't understand why you didn't include other times, because I live not too far from there, and most days I'm there mid-afternoon after I pick up my son, and we're on that area, and it's not a fun time to drive either. So why we're just limited it to a study of rush hour, I don't understand. And you ever drive that Saturday morning up that road?
Saturday morning, no.
It's not fun either. So I don't understand why it's so restricted, your study, when I probably travel that area probably 15 to 20 times a week, and maybe a third of the time it's not too hard to drive, but the other times it's pretty heavy traffic.
Standard practice in the industry for preparation of traffic studies is we look at the commuter peak hours because that's when the volumes are the highest. Your traffic consultant reviewed that. And if you look at the DOT data, which I don't know that we put in a report, but you'll see a clear peak in the morning. Not that there's no traffic during the middle of the day, but there is traffic, but it's lower than the morning and afternoon peak hours. That's why we look at those two periods, and that's standard practice. That's what the DOT requires us to do. Other agencies require us to do. That's the standard.
Yeah, but if you were putting an office building there, you'd be concerned about the peak hours of 9 to 5, people coming in 8 to 9, and then leaving between 4:30 and 6. Here you talk about potentially people coming in and out all day long.
But at lower levels, and like I said, we're treating this as, you know, a non-age restricted community from a traffic perspective. So people are going to work in the morning, in the afternoon, they're coming home from work, they're coming home from shopping. They're, you know, probably not coming from school or anything like that because there are no children, as Mr. Coakley indicated, no children in this community unless somebody's dealing with grandkids. So it's still looking at the AM and PM peak hours. So we had no indication that there was a concern about Saturday, and generally for a residential community, we don't look at, you know, other hours. We don't look at Saturday peaks. Certainly when we're working with a retail center, we would look at a Saturday because the shopping centers have higher traffic on a Saturday. Here, you don't. The traffic volumes for a weekend from a residential community are, you know, not as significant as they are during the commuter peaks.
let me just ask you a question about
Sure.
JCC traffic.
Yes.
Did you look into that at all?
We did. While a portion of this property will be dedicated to the JCC, and other than the emergency access between the two properties, the JCC will continue to be served from their existing driveway in Talamini. So any change, if there were any change from the JCC, would be using Talamini and not coming through this site. And really, as Mrs. Friedman indicated when she testified the last time, this land is to better serve their existing programs and to provide more space for what they already operate there, so there would be no increase in the traffic generated from the JCC either.
Now, did you look into the question of whether or not there might be placed sidewalks along 202, 206 from the project?
Yes, we did look at Mr. Fishinger raised the question is, we provide sidewalks within the community, allows the residents to walk around the community. And he questioned, well, why don't we have sidewalks along Route 202, 206? And we looked at that. There are no existing sidewalks anywhere in the area. We're looking at a state highway that has a posted speed limit of 50 miles an hour. It's not really a great location to bring people out to, besides the fact that it would connect to nothing. I will put my municipal engineer's hat on for a moment and say, well, somebody always has to start, but there's not even anything anywhere near this to lead to. Furthermore, Mr. Chairman, since you know the area from being at the vet hospital, there's a stream crossing. There's a bridge right near the existing farm stand. You have shoulders, you have a guide rail that is attached to the bridge abutment, so there is no room to place a sidewalk. And from that bridge going south along our frontage, the stream actually runs parallel to the roadway. And under DEP regulations, that's within a riparian zone. They don't want you to improve things besides, and Mr. Michella can answer this better, but there's an embankment there. So there's not a good place to provide a sidewalk and no place to lead somebody to.
But apart from your comments, you and Mr. Fishinger agreed that the better course here would be to defer this issue until site plan approval, and also it would be an issue that DOT would have to consider. So that your suggestion?
That is my suggestion, that we defer this. I don't think DOT is, DOT is not going to want to see sidewalks out there. And I won't speak for Mr. Fishinger. He's very capable enough to speak on his own. I don't think that it's something that we can consider at a later point, but I don't think DOT is going to want to see those. I don't have anything further.
But just to conclude one point, so the means of ingress and egress, the design of it, the layout, all of that is ultimately up to the Department of Transportation. Is that so?
That is correct. That is correct.
No further questions.
I have a question on, maybe you can help me out with height and slopes, and that would lead to some questions on site distances. And basically, you can describe to the board from West Foothill Road down to Talamini, approximately how many feet does that drop traveling north to south?
We do have an exhibit showing the site distance.
Okay, great.
You want to introduce that?
Please, yeah, that would be great. You want to call this?
Kevin, I don't think we marked an exhibit at the last hearing, right? So this is A1? A1?
There was one exhibit marked at the last hearing.
There was?
Okay. So what do you want to call this?
Oh, well, I'm sorry, you know what, I'm actually looking at your aerial that I have marked A4. So, give me 1 second, let me just. This is a site distance plan program. I think you had some exhibits pre-marked. That's why we started with A4 instead of this being 1. Thank you. So why don't we just skip 1, 2, and 3? We'll go to 5 with this, right? Because we have a 4. So this will be A5 for the record.
Mr. Aller, do you want me to mark this as?
Yes, with today's date, please. A5. Yeah.
Just if any members of the public want to see one? Yeah, just make sure they have some copies.
So this exhibit, A5, entitled Site Distance Plan and Profile, is dated October 11th, 2024. I have a full-size one, so this is at a scale of 1 inch equals 40. It was prepared by Gladstone Design in conjunction with my office. They prepared the plan, we reviewed it. Mr. Chairman, we don't have, Talamini is not shown on here, but I know 202, 206 flattens out. So at the far southern edge of this exhibit, which is one property to the south of the subject site, the elevation is approximately 140. At West Foothill Road, it is the intersection, the middle of the intersection is at approximately elevation 181. So there's 41 feet of elevation change.
And where
Plus that.
where are we measuring again?
Okay.
181 from West Foothill to which point?
To 140, which is at the far left side of the exhibit, which is at the far south end. So Talamini Road is in that same general area because the road really flattens out as you head south.
So I see the number 5% floated around. I happen to know a thing or two about mathematics, and if I take 181 minus 140 and take the differential of 41 and divide it by 181, it's certainly not 5%.
No, the 5%, what we did is we took the elevation at our site driveway.
Okay.
And the reason that the percent slope of the roadway is important is only in the fact that the intersection site distance that I testified to before, if you're above 3% and you're headed downhill, you have to increase that number because gravity is pulling that car down and it's harder to slow it down. So from our site driveway to the northern end of our study, that portion of Route 202, 206 is at 5%. From our site driveway towards Talamini, it's much flatter, it's less than 3%, so we did not have to adjust the intersection site distance to take account of grade. That's the only reason that 5%'s there.
Okay, listen, like I said, the differential between 181 to 140 feet that you've mentioned here is much larger than 5%. Let's just agree on that point.
It's 41 feet over
Yes.
about 1,200 feet.
Okay?
So 40 divided by 1,200. 3%. What he said, 3%.
I had those nuns, they taught me those numerals, you know?
Yeah, the pesky numbers. All right, so again, I'm not going to give testimony, and I want to put on the record, I'm certainly not an expert in traffic movement, but I've been to the veterinary medical facility 47 times over 10 years. My dog has issues. But nonetheless, I do consider myself a residential expert in that intersection. So, Mr. Keller, I can tell you firsthand, I've seen unbelievably bad traffic at that intersection all times of days. I don't know the times of my 47 visits to the veterinary facility, which lies directly across from your property, but it's covered, it's safe to say it's covered all times of days. I have witnessed personally incredibly close calls. So my question to you, Mr. Keller, is what is the incremental additional trip that causes an additional set of accidents? So you've testified that you Oprah'd the police department. You've come up with 2 accidents over 4 years. At what point, what's the additive number, what's the incremental number of trips that turns that 2 accidents into 20 accidents?
It's not necessarily related to volume.
Okay.
It's related to operating conditions, to characteristics. As I said, those two accidents that were reported, that's all I can get from the police department, had nothing to do with the roadway itself. It had to do, unfortunately, with society today and driver behavior. That is, there could be one car in the road, there could be 100 cars in the road. The chance that you have a driver who's not paying attention, it doesn't make a difference.
Sure.
It's a matter of a driver not doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is watching the road.
So again, Mr. Keller, what's the number of trips that incrementally changes this intersection from a 2 accident per 4-year ratio to a much dangerous, much
I don't think
dangerous
that,
intersection?
to me, it's not related to volume.
So there is no number, we could add 500 trips and it won't change the incremental risk level of that intersection?
From an accident perspective, no. It's going to change the levels of service. And at some point, if you add enough traffic, again, it comes back to driver behavior. Driver behavior is going to say, I want to get out into the roadway, and I'm going to accept a gap that I shouldn't. But that's not the condition we have here. We're looking at a very low traffic generator from this community.
So there's no number at which an incremental trip, a +1 trip, changes the risk profile of this intersection?
No.
Your testimony. Mr. Pullman, I thought you were doing, Mr. Keller, you're doing a great job here, and I'm trying to understand, at what level does this become more than 2 accidents? And you won't give an answer, and I'm going to accept what you've put on the record. We've had situations, the zoning board, where, frankly, a traffic engineer has been wrong, not you, but we've had people that have described conditions, something's been built, and it just didn't work out. We built a Wawa a few years ago, 8 years ago, and, the traffic just didn't shake out the way that the traffic engineer, for whatever reasons, it could be demographics, could be changes at the county level. It's a much more dangerous condition than was described by the traffic engineer. And my question to you is, what happens when you're wrong? What do we do? Who do we come back to? Who do we go and say, hey, you got this wrong and we need to fix it? And then compound that with, what if this living situation with the 55 and older is changed in court? What if, something happens at the state level, which they say 55 and older communities doesn't matter anymore. Now we have, anyone can live here. We have children, we have buses, we have dump trucks, we have all new things happening. What happens to your testimony today? Because the approvals run with the property forever. Forever.
Understood, Mr. Chairman, and I think
you can take a crack at that.
the important thing, and this comes back to, we didn't analyze the traffic based on this being an age-restricted community. We based it upon a non-age-restricted, kids, everything else, because that is the conservative approach, that is the data that I feel more comfortable on, and I don't have to defend why we used a lower trip rate. I think I think the likelihood that a residential community is going to have a significantly different traffic pattern than, a retail use is a lot less likely. There's, we as traffic engineers, and I've been doing this for a lot of years, we base it on the data that's available to us, the data that is in the publications that we use, data that's provided by DOT. It is not an exact science. And I think because we've taken a conservative approach with the amount of traffic, using, as Mr. Fishinger suggested, the 2020 traffic data for 202, and not our own counts, and showed that the level of service still operates at an acceptable level, I think that provides, at least from my perspective, as a person who put my signature on this plan, on this report, that I'm comfortable that this is appropriate. Now, we also, have to go to DOT. we still have to, because it's their highway, they control the access. We have to get an access permit from them. So we have to go through another round of review to make that happen. We've reviewed the state highway access management code, believe in our analysis of the regulations that this is a conforming location, this is an appropriate location for this intersection, and it's one that the state DOT will provide an access permit to.
Mr. Chairman, I understand your,
Use the mic because a lot of people are watching at home. Thank you.
understand your line of questioning, but in events such as this before boards in this state and probably every other state, expert testimony of your own expert or the applicant's expert can be relied on perhaps more readily than our own individual experiences.
I agree with that, and I think that's an important fact. And I certainly don't want to take preference above your experts, and nor am I qualified. But I have visited the site 47 times over 10 years and have witnessed some incredible, fascinating events from drivers that were probably very distracted, like you mentioned.
Right. It's unfortunate, but that's,
I have a question.
Please, Mrs. Amin.
You know, the traffic on 202, 206 sometimes gets so bad that it's very difficult to make a left turn onto 202, 206 because both directions the traffic is bad. Because I live on Arthur Road, which is like a block north of Foothill Road. And I avoid going onto 202, 206 during certain hours because the traffic is so bad. I take the back roads and then get out. So is there a provision that this complex can have a second location from which they can come out and go into Talamini Road or something like that? Would that help?
we only have access to Route 202, 206.
One access.
We have provided an emergency access through the JCC, and it's reciprocal to both parties. But under both DOT regulations and under the residential site improvement standards, this development doesn't require a second means of access. I think my testimony has shown that the intersection can function safely, and it's appropriately located and will operate at an acceptable level of service.
Yeah.
I have a question, if she's finished.
Whoever's ready to go.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, you keep referring to a conservative approach with your numbers.
Correct.
I'm just curious how things would have been different if you did it with an age-restricted app as opposed to a non-age-restricted development. Because
Volumes would have been lower, Mr. Bongiorno, if we had used age-restricted. I didn't analyze the traffic using age-restricted data.
I understand that. No,
Right.
And I guess my question is, wouldn't an age-restricted community have more seniors? Maybe people, not the best drivers. I'm a senior myself, so the question is, what would have happened? Your position is that the numbers would have been less and safer.
Well, the volumes of traffic are separate from safe operations. The safe operations, I think, are best given by Exhibit A5, our sightline profile, that shows that there are hundreds of feet of sight distance for a driver to observe a vehicle coming. When you have this, even if somebody is, slower, reacts a little bit more slowly, this still shows that there is more than sufficient time for that movement to occur coming out of the development and not impact on the flow of traffic along 202, 206.
Thank you.
Okay, so, Mr. Keller, just a few questions. I try to wait to the end, just to give you an opportunity to kind of say you're part of this. Honestly, I wasn't even aware that this development was going to allow a left turn out of this space. Was there a time with your conversations and meeting with your client that you suggested maybe that's not a good idea? Or were you always wholeheartedly thought that it was safe to pull out and make a left?
I never suggested anything else. I always felt that a full movement intersection was appropriate.
Right, even though it's directly across from the veterinary center. I mean, right now, currently, there's a lane there. So they're actually gonna cross a shoulder, as you say, I think, through traffic. Then there's I don't know what you call that.
The left turn lane.
That cigar, well, no, it's actually not, on this plan, it shows as a thick space. It's got lines in it. So they're gonna cross that. You can take a look here. This was provided. They're gonna cross that, and then they're gonna face that right there. What's that right there? It looks like a cigar. It's got the.
What you just showed me, Mr. Fresco, is currently there's a painted median there, as I described to the chairman, because once you go past the vet hospital heading south, you need to take that left turn lane that was provided for the vet hospital and bring traffic back
Wean it down.
to the center line. So what we're proposing with this is that painted median would be removed. A left turn lane, similar to what is provided for the vet hospital, would be provided
Right.
for
I understand.
northbound traffic.
I understand. So someone is going to be traveling from the south to the north. They're going to make a left in, while meanwhile, somebody's going to be exiting, and they're also going to be going north. And on top of that, on a 50-mile-per-hour lane, there's going to be Mr. Foose pulling out of the vet center, and he could potentially be making a left or a right, north or south as well. And you thought that, and I mean, your professional opinion, and again, Mr. Coakley, he is the expert. Your expert opinion is that is good in its current state? That's acceptably safe?
It's an appropriately designed intersection. Let me add to that.
No, that's fine. You could just simply say yes or no. I accept that. That's fine. Okay.
I think it's appropriately designed.
Oh, no, go ahead. I don't want him to feel like I'm grilling him on it. I just want to hear, yeah.
No, not at all. That's what I'm here for.
All right, awesome.
Is when you're on the side street, when you're pulling out of the vet hospital or you're pulling out of this development, whether you're making a left or right, you have to wait for all the traffic on the state highway to clear. So if Mr. Foose is waiting to make the left into the vet hospital and I'm waiting to come out of this development, I have to wait for him to clear the intersection before I can go. That's the order of travel at an unsignalized intersection.
Okay.
I have to wait because I have the stop sign.
All right. Who wrote the conclusion?
I did.
You write that yourself? Okay.
Yes.
So in the conclusion, and I'm going to quote you, you say, more than adequate sight distance is provided at this proposed highway and permits safe movements into and out of the driveway on the route to it. You actually wrote more than adequate, more than, you wrote more than.
I did.
Yeah, and you didn't just write adequate, you wrote more than adequate.
You're exactly,
And even
yes.
with the slope that we spoke about and the speed and the fact that there's an opposing intersection, another intersection 670 feet from what you referred to as a crest, you feel like there's more than adequate.
Yes, I do.
Okay, now, with that being said, sir, you also said, and I am going to quote you again, you actually said that regarding the left turn lane, you said there should be added. So you felt like the left turn lane should be added, almost as it's essential to the safety of this. Is that true? Do you feel that way?
It should be added because, for two reasons. One, there's already a southbound left turn lane, and I believe DOT will require it. And it also, providing a left turn lane, provides for safer movements because I've removed that turning traffic out of the flow of the traffic that is headed north. And I think that is a safer approach to do that. And it should be added, which is why the plans show it. Obviously, what I say should be added has to be agreed to by the DOT.
That's right. And Mr. Coakley stated that the DOT, it's up to the DOT.
It's their roadway.
Right.
Ultimately, they have to approve the access for this site.
So,
I think they will.
so, yes, please.
You have two expert reports here, not just Mr. Keller, but your own expert report.
Right. I'm just drawing a connection between his
Which
conclusion.
coincides with his ultimate findings.
Right, but his conclusion does not say anywhere that a left turn lane should be added, or that he's making a recommendation that the left turn lane is essential to this. He doesn't say that in his conclusion. His conclusion says more than adequate, not adequate, more than adequate, not with a left turn lane. So that's all I'm saying. I just wanted.
The site distance is a separate topic and issue as, you know, to the provision of the left turn lane.
Okay, well, I'm led to believe by reading the conclusion that there's more than that there is no issue, that there is no, that we're not asking for a left turn lane, that you actually are saying you think it should be there. And that's all.
Those are two separate, the site distance is for the traffic coming out of this development to be able to see in either direction along 202, 206 in order to make a safe decision to enter the traffic stream. The left turn lane is not related to that same site distance. It's to take, you know, if there were, let me put it this way, if the vet hospital did not have a left turn lane, I would not recommend one.
Okay.
But the DOT obviously approved the left turn lane for the vet hospital. And because of that, I think we should have one for this so that we have matching roadway cross sections for both sides, both directions of travel.
All right, that was all. Thank you.
I'm curious, and I'm just going to throw this out, and it's more rhetorical than anything, but, you know, trying to hedge and protect ourselves. If your analysis was done on the 55 and older, but you used standard residential demographics, basically to rephrase what you said, that you used a more conservative benchmark here, would it be appropriate to hedge this risk and legal drift and project drift down the road to say this has to be a 55 and older community forever? Would that be a way to make sure that your conservative numbers and analysis hold up?
That's a legal question.
I'm throwing it out. I don't even know if this board has authority to ask for such a thing, but if that was to be stipulated, that would make your conservative numbers relevant and in the future and prevent mistakes that other traffic engineers have made in front of this board. And you don't have to answer it, but maybe that's something in the back of our minds as we go forward we want to talk about, because Mr. Keller, he did his analysis off of these conservative numbers. Let's protect the demographics and keep it as 55 and older to prevent a court ruling or any legal drift that happens in the future. So, if there's no other board questions? Oh.
Yeah, just one clarification on the two accidents that you identified. What were the limits that you actually asked for data on?
Limits of the Oprah?
I
Yes,
believe it was from Foothill Road to Talamini.
Okay, from intersection.
Because I wanted to make sure that I got everything, and then I reviewed it and culled it down to the area related to our site.
Okay, thank you.
Are you going to present us with a copy of the Oprah results?
Well, the accident reports are contained in appendix
Part of his report.
of the report. They're in the report.
But in the scope of your request for accident data, that was only Foothill Road and south?
It was the stretch of 202, 206 between the two intersections.
Right, so it did not include West Foothill, nor did it include Talamini?
No, because those are not related to our.
Just want to make sure
Yeah.
we're
No,
apples to apples. Thank you.
that's correct.
All right, Mr. Fissinger, good evening, sir. I know you've been patiently waiting.
I won't bore you with too much. Generally speaking, I agree with Mr. Keller. He went back and revised the report to my satisfaction, added the developments that I wanted. The important thing with the traffic analysis is what I had to make sure he did is look at not only the volumes now, but I said, well, the highest volumes that we had, which happened to be just before COVID in February of 2020, to make sure that should traffic volumes return to pre-COVID levels, that the level of service is still acceptable, which he did. He did at my request and added the other developments as well. We also did go back and forth with the sight lines where I insist, as far as I'm concerned, if it looks like a street, it acts like a street. We want intersection sight distance like it's a street. And Mr. Keller's office did provide me the updated site profile in advance, so I did have a chance to review it ahead of time. And the numbers are correct, that they have enough sight distance that if you're looking up and down, you can see a car coming in enough time to make the turn without, as Mr. Keller said, without them needing to slow down. Now, keep in mind that is, and you can look on the figure, there is a height of eye and a height of object. All of this assumes that you can see something that's 3.5 feet above the roadway. And unless you're driving some Italian supercar that's probably not even legal in the US, all cars are over 3.5 feet high. So you may not see the wheels or the entire car, but you'll see enough of the car to know it's coming and decide to make the turn. That's why you have the line on this figure that's above the actual grade of the road, is we're looking, that you're not looking right at the road, you're looking to see a car coming. If somebody 700 feet away rolled a ball across the street, might you see that? No, but you're not gonna be worried about it, that hitting you as it comes at you. So I did review the sight distance and reviewed the traffic volumes, and I'm in agreement with Mr. Keller's conclusions after he's made the corrections that we said. And with regard to the age-restricted, it took a while to get there, but Mr. Keller's correct. The ITE numbers for an age-restricted community are lower than they would be for traditional market rate units. I agree with Mr. Keller that the amount that they're lower may depend on the size of the development, where it is, how long it's been there. As you could, like any other community, as it develops, people will age in place. And maybe when this first opens, more people are working, but 10 years later, more of them will have retired. But generally, since he used the market rate units, that is the more conservative approach. And the important thing to remember is we look at, what the ITE does is it looks at traffic from a residential development across the entire day and says, at this time, it's the highest in the morning, and this time it's the highest in the afternoon. And residential, almost every single time, peaks in the morning peak hour area and in the evening peak hour area. And what we do is we take the highest hour of the development and the highest hour of the road, which might not occur at the same time, but we assume that they do, that the most people are coming out of development at the same time, there's the most traffic on the road, and the presumption is if that will work, if the levels of service are acceptable, then any other time during the day, one or both of those numbers will be lower, so the level of service won't be worse. And to answer your question about when do you start adding more accidents, generally speaking, and telling you a number of cars is kind of hard to do, but that's why we do the level of service analysis, is that EF threshold. When you hit level of service F, the historical research is that's when drivers start to get frustrated and start to take gaps that they're not used to. So that's why a D level of service is okay and an F level of service is not, is that threshold, once you cross to F, is when people start to accept smaller gaps, take more risks, and that is the threshold we try to use as to what's acceptable and not acceptable. We don't really like to say safe and unsafe because it's not a hard line in the sand, but
Why wouldn't you say safe or unsafe? At what point does somebody get hurt and you feel bad? I mean, that's my question as an expert. You know, I'm just throwing it out to another case. I'm thinking on Route 22. You know, I basically chastise the applicant. You know, at what point do you start to feel bad when a traffic expert comes before the board, you know, to build a Wawa, and volume is 40% above what they predicted for whatever reason? In this example, the veterinary just got purchased by a private equity firm. They've essentially doubled their patients. There is a number, and you guys don't have to agree on it. I don't have to agree on it. But there is a number at which this intersection becomes unsafe. And I'm disappointed in that we can't come to that number. But I think that we need to find a way that we can lock in this analysis and be very sure and be very clear that going forward, we have minimized potentials for accidents. And if that means we're going to lock this down as a 55 and older community, maybe that's the path that we should take. So there's no incremental number that you think that makes this go from 2 accidents to 60 accidents.
no, I mean, we could back into a
defies
number as
logic.
to when that level of service hits that F threshold. You know, you can keep adding numbers to the driveway until it hits a failure.
We are a board that is comprised of laymen. We are not experts. We don't pretend to be experts on any day of the week. We are residents of our town, appointed by the Township Council. We are laymen. I've asked you both for that number. You both refused to give it. I hope it's reflected in the record that at some point, this board asked for what level, number of trips, does this intersection become unsafe? And both experts that have degrees and fancy things from the state of New Jersey have refused to give that number to this board. It's left an interrelated, I can spell that if you want, an interrelated issue that the board cannot reconcile, I cannot reconcile, and my question hasn't been answered.
Mr. Chairman, I will just ask that it's not refused, it's just we're not able to give you that number. It's not that I have it and refuse to give it to you, I just don't have it. And I'll let Mr. Keller speak for himself, but
I agree with Mr. Fishinger. It's not that we refuse to, it's that
Do you guys work for the same firm? Do you work for different firms?
we work for different firms, yes.
Are you done with your questions, Mr. Fissinger?
as I don't have any questions for Mr. Keller. He addressed everything.
Okay. For members of the public, we're going to finish up with our planner and our engineer. We're going to take a break, and then you can ask questions and all the fun things you've heard in the last 90 minutes. So, Bill or Catherine, whoever's ready.
Mr. Chairman, I just
Yep.
have actually two questions for the traffic experts. One is, you mentioned that you could potentially add numbers to change the D to an F. I was a pretty good student, got mostly A's and B's, but occasionally I might have gotten a D. And if I did, I was wondering how close to the F I was, or did my teacher promote me from an F to a D? So what separates the D from the F here? How close are we, or how far away from the two grades are these intersections?
I would have to plug it all in the computer to give you an exact number, but I would think if put on the spot, I'd say you could probably increase the numbers by at least 20, 30% before you would get that far, but we would have to have the analysis do the math. It's not simple enough math that I can do in my head.
Okay. The second question I have for you, Mr. Fissinger, is do you agree that the left turn lane is necessary in order to provide safety on the highway for people who are heading north to make a left turn into this development?
I think it's a safer condition, and yes, that it should be there. Notwithstanding the fact that I agree with Mr. Keller, the state is going to require it. Having that left turn is a safer condition. We typically will put left turn lanes in to improve the capacity of the intersection and make it safer, to get those cars waiting to make a left turn out of the full traffic stream, so that if somebody's coming up behind them, they're not slamming on the brake because someone's sitting there to make a left turn.
And suppose the state doesn't approve it.
Then It's possible they're coming back to this board. Since this is a bifurcated application, I think they're coming back to this board regardless, and that's something the board would need to address if the state says no.
Mr. Fishinger, they wouldn't come back to this board if it was denied.
I'm sorry?
They wouldn't be back in front of this board if this was denied.
You're right. If it was denied, they would not be.
It's not automatically coming back to this board.
You're correct.
Thank you.
Assuming there's an approval.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a handful of questions. Back to Mr. Fresco's note and question about the conclusion including more than adequate. What is the basis for more than adequate?
Well, to me, the minimum, and this is borne out by what the industry publications say, the minimum sight distance required at an intersection is stopping sight distance. That is the minimum required. That has to be provided, because if it doesn't meet stopping sight distance, then it is an unsafe location. Because we meet and actually exceed the intersection sight distance, then it, in my opinion, that makes it more than adequate sight distance, because we've met the highest standard, and then there's still visibility beyond that point.
What was the date of the traffic report, the updated one?
October 9th.
What was the date of the original site distance plan that was prepared and submitted? I'll tell you.
This is dated October 11th.
October 11th. The traffic engineer, the board's traffic engineers in their review included that the site distances were not adequate as designed. And then we received tonight an updated site distance that actually then met the requirements as noted under the AASHTO standards that the board's traffic engineer included on a plan dated October 22nd. So at the time of the conclusion, where you found it was more than adequate, it didn't even meet the review standard that our board engineer included. So is it just adequate because now it meets it exactly, or is it still more than adequate?
I think we issued the report. Mr. Fishinger was prompt with his review. Looking at when we first prepared this based upon stopping sight distance, and I knew that concern from the last meeting was the perception of where that crest in the roadway of Route 202, 206 was. And when we first prepared this using stopping sight distance, I could clearly see from the profile that we still had distance to go. And it's borne out by this exhibit, which, no, we did not have this exhibit that's marked as A5 at the time that I wrote the report. However, looking at the data, having the profile that was prepared by Gladstone, I knew that and I had gone out to the site myself, marked where the crest was in the roadway, and that crest was well beyond the stopping sight distance. And once Mr. Fishinger asked for the intersection sight distance, I knew we were more than adequate.
So based on the AASHTO standards, are you more than adequate or are you adequate?
We were more than adequate.
So AASHTO requires, according to Mr. Fishinger's calculations, 610 looking south and 671 looking north. What do you provide?
And that's what we're providing, and more. I mean, we stopped at 671 because that's the outer limit of what any criteria would be. If we continue
So based on the, sorry to cut you off, based on the design standards, are you adequate and you meet the design standard?
we're more than adequate.
Okay, thank you. As far as the request for the traffic collision data from the police reports, that was just from Bridgewater Township Police?
Yes.
Would there be any other crash data that might exist from state police? Because it's a state highway, would there be any possibility that there'd be other records outside the township?
It's possible, but I mean, the most complete records would be from Bridgewater because they would be the ones who would respond to an accident on that roadway. State police typically only respond to ones on interstates. You know, they can respond to ones on state highways, but usually that's the local police department.
So these crash data reports are, in your opinion, complete? They represent all crashes that happened in
All reported crashes.
all reported crashes. Thank you. And I just had one other question about the design. Just looking at the site distance profile, there is an existing left turn lane that kind of goes head to head with the proposed left turn lane that's proposed over the existing hashing in the median.
In 202, 206 itself.
In 202, 206, going south into the veterinary driveway.
Correct.
I don't know if it's just visually, but it appears to conflict a little bit with the proposed driveway into the site. It creeps in, quite a bit, which I think I don't know if you're proposing to amend that left turn into the vet site, but I think that it probably needs to be amended for where it is located in proximity to the proposed driveway into the site.
There may need to be some adjustments to the striping of that. That would be handled with the DOT review, but it doesn't impact upon the functionality of the existing southbound left turn lane.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's all I had.
Thank you. Mr. Burr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Keller, a follow-up question to Catherine's about the stopping site distance profile.
Intersection site distance profile.
Thank you.
Just want to be clear.
I think you had indicated, and what Gladstone's profile shows is 610 feet to the south, 671 to the north is what is required, correct?
And it's what we are providing.
But you had started to indicate that the profile actually shows that distance is actually more than those distances.
Right. We didn't show anything beyond what was required.
So did you run a profile, or did you check what the actual distance is where it's no longer viable, or?
No, I mean, when I was out in the field and visited the site, I know where the crest is, but we didn't run it beyond this point.
Where is the crest in relation to the profile? Can you describe it?
I don't recall off the top of my head. There's an existing driveway further north for a home. I don't remember the specifics, but it is beyond the limits of this profile.
Okay. And in your revised evaluation, maybe it was in the original one, in your conclusions paragraph, you indicate that the permit that would need to be, the access permit that would need to be obtained from DOT would be a minor access permit, is that correct?
No, it's a major, because.
It is a major?
Yeah.
Okay.
Our report indicates.
I thought I saw that it said a minor.
It does say minor.
Does it?
Minor driveway access permit. I was going to ask you to differentiate why this wouldn't be a major.
The difference between a minor and a major is if you exceed 500 trips in a day, then it becomes a major. And the other main difference is that you have to deal with the Major Access Bureau for a major permit, whereas a minor is handled by the operations group.
And will this generate more than 500 trips?
I have to check because we don't normally look at daily traffic volumes because they don't really have any purpose in an analysis other than establishing a threshold. So we'd have to look at that as to whether it would be a major or a minor. But the main differences are which bureau approves it. Because we're looking at a left turn lane, the operations people typically kick it up to major access because they don't want to get involved in that. But from a process, regardless of the type of permit, it still meets the State Highway Access Management Code requirements. It's a conforming lot, it's a conforming intersection, and it complies with all of the requirements under DOT. Minor and major is a matter of process.
In your experience, I think you had mentioned the left turn lane heading northbound, turning into the site would be something that you recommend, and I think Mr. Fishinger even went as far as to say it's something likely that DOT would require.
I agree.
In your
yes.
experience, could there be any other improvements that DOT may require through this frontage? as a result of
Unlikely.
a project like this?
No. For a project like this, no, unlikely.
And if the board was inclined to require sidewalk, even if it was at a future phase, if this use variance is approved, would DOT opine about the sidewalk, or would that be solely a municipal decision?
They would most likely opine upon it,
One way or another?
one way or another, yes.
Have an opinion on what that might be?
I don't think that they would be in support of it.
Earlier in your testimony, you had mentioned, I think in your analysis, the adjacent intersections were level, I think you said level of service D. I think you said the adjacent intersections, Talamini, and in your original testimony, I think you had indicated level of service Ds for the adjacent intersections. Was that correct?
Would be level service D or better. This is all summarized in Table 3 of our report. For Talamini, the Talamini approach operates at level of service D, while Route 206, 202, 206 operates at level of service C or level of service A, depending on the time frame and the direction of travel. Obviously, 202, 206 is directional as far as the traffic flows.
And what about the northerly intersections?
Foothill Road, in the morning peak hour, the Foothill Road approach operates at level of service D. At an unsignalized intersection, there are no levels of service for the through traffic because they're unimpeded. So we look at the side street traffic and we look at the southbound left turn traffic, which is impeded by northbound traffic. All the other, the left turn lane operates at level of service B, and the westbound Foothill Road approach operates at level of service B during the PM peak hour, based on the volumes.
And can you just explain to the board how then, with this proposed driveway, how that intersection would function as a C? How would that actually be an I think you said the proposed driveway would function as a C.
Correct.
Just curious how you would be C here, and just a few hundred feet north at Foothill, it would be D. Can you explain that for the board?
The main reason that Foothill operates at level of service B is most of the traffic coming out of Foothill Road makes a right-hand turn. Right-hand turn only has to enter the one direction of traffic. There are very few left turns there based upon the counts that were done.
Can I interrupt you? Did you say B as in
B
boy?
as in boy.
It was not D
No.
at any point?
Oh, I'm sorry. In the morning peak hour, it's a level service D, and the reason for that is the morning peak hour. Even though again it's predominantly right turn movements, there's a much higher northbound flow on Route 202, 206, and a higher right turn movement than in the PM peak hour, when both of those numbers are lower than the AM peak hour, which is why it goes from a D to a B. Now at our site driveway, we have a mix of left-hand turns and right-hand turns. So, and they're all being made from a single lane. So the left turn movements, because they're a higher percentage of the total traffic on our site driveway, and there's also the vet hospital across, you know, when somebody's coming out of that, there is a greater, you know, there's more decision-making that has to occur because have to look in both directions along 206, and then I have to check if Mr. Foose is coming out of the vet hospital. So, there's that added movement at that location. But level of service C is still a very good level of service for an unsignalized intersection on a state highway.
Okay. Let me go back to one or two more questions. Let me go back to the DOT permitting process. And I think we heard at the last hearing with Mr. Michello that there are some environmental constraints along the frontage of this property. Can you just describe for the board the interplay between when the DOT application would be submitted in relation to the DEP permit applications? Who takes precedent as far as where the driveway ultimately would be positioned and approved?
I will defer to Mr. Michello about the DEP approval. The DOT approval, they will look at it from an operational standpoint. They will look at it in the context of the State Highway Access Management Code, and the DEP will look at it from a flood hazard perspective. They're separate paths that we have to follow, and there's really no interplay between the two agencies on the approval of that intersection. I'll let Mr. Michello, talk about, the DEP. We wouldn't have proposed a driveway in this location if we did not believe that it could be approved by both agencies. My role on this is dealing with DOT. I think they will approve it, and I'm sure Mr. Michello is going to say, based on his analysis of the DEP regulations, they will also approve that location for this site driveway.
So DOT, in their review of a permit, wouldn't necessarily look at the fact that there may or may not be a floodplain there or areas that are prone to flooding. That would be more of the DEP permit application.
It would be more DEP, but the DOT does look at drainage. So they will look at it from a different perspective, but they will look at it from a drainage perspective.
Did you review the site plan as a whole in terms of the internal circulation?
I did.
that's proposed?
Yes.
Do you have any concerns from a safety, efficiency perspective as far as circulation, the radii of the intersections, the ability of fire trucks, et cetera, to navigate through the site?
I don't. I've looked at it. I know that Mr. Michel's office prepared a truck turning template, shows that the site circulates. We reviewed it for compliance with RSIS standards. In our opinion, it satisfies those. In general, from a traffic circulation perspective, it's well designed and will function and meet the needs of the residents, visitors, and emergency services and delivery vehicles.
I don't remember seeing a memo from the fire official or fire marshal, but in the absence of that, I did see on the truck turning movement, there were some intersections where a fire truck would encroach over the center line into oncoming traffic. Is that a cause for concern for you?
Not from emergency vehicles perspective, I don't believe so.
And do you happen to know if garbage trucks or other larger trucks that may navigate the site, would they be able to stay in their lane or would they encroach as well?
I don't know. I don't know that that analysis was performed. We did get a letter from the fire marshal.
Did you?
Yes.
Do you know the date of that?
The revised letter was dated October 24th, and it says the turning radius for the Green Knoll fire truck has been addressed and shows on the plans. He didn't see the fire hydrants, but that's more of a site plan issue. And obviously, we can put fire hydrants in whatever manner that meets the fire marshal's requirements.
Did he raise any other questions or concerns?
No, he did not.
Okay, good. Last question. We heard that there's an exhibit that will be presented tonight showing the new emergency access, the reciprocal emergency access with JCC.
Correct.
Have you reviewed that exhibit?
Yes.
And do you have any concerns with that exhibit in terms of the layout?
No, I
Everything
don't.
works
Everything,
horizontally, vertically?
it's You know, it's got some sweeping curves to it, but they're all of adequate dimension to accommodate should a fire truck need to come in that way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. We're going to take a break. The time is 8:56. It's called 9 o'clock. Let's reconvene at 9:15. Thank you.
Test.
We're going to come back in session. It's 9:17. Nancy, could you call the roll, please? Here.
Here.
Yeah.
Here.
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 All right, thank you. Mr. Coakley.
Mr. Keller is here for questions of the board and questions of the public.
Wonderful. Members of the public, if you'd like to ask questions of the traffic testimony from Mr. Keller or from Mr. Fissinger, please come on forward. We just need your name and address, and you can take the mic.
Robert Kurz, 775 West Foothill Road.
Would you spell your last name, please?
A-U-R-Z, no T. Just,
Gotcha.
no matter how many times I try to spell it, people still give me a T. Mr. Keller, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
If you could just get a little closer to the mic, please. Thanks. We got people watching at home, yeah.
I'm too loud anyhow.
Thank you.
As far as the statistics for the accidents,
Correct.
you're saying that that's between Foothill and Talamini?
The segment across our site frontage, we used each road as the outbounds of the request.
So that should encompass something at the traffic light for a southbound traffic?
No, we said between those two intersections.
So you don't count the traffic light?
Correct.
Okay, and at the time that the town gave you the statistics, what businesses were there that would have generated any kind of traffic at all?
Well, we gave them a 4-year time frame from January 1 of 2020 to September 9th of 2024.
Okay, so as your comment, which I can understand, it's not a traffic construction issue, it was more of a drivers in attendance or?
Correct. Just general traffic conditions.
So really, you can't use that as a number now, because now you're making traffic coming out, traffic coming into the roadway, whereas before, the traffic was just doing this.
Well, you have the vet hospital across the way.
Okay, that's one.
Right, so, I mean, that's right opposite ours. So it can be indicative of the likely traffic or accident pattern that may exist at a driveway on the other side of the road.
So a business that's open just during business hours would generate the same traffic as the residential area?
We're talking about accidents, not traffic volumes.
Not traffic volumes, but the traffic that could cause an accident, I'm asking.
It's part of the analysis. I can only ask the police department for activities that occur in that stretch. So we also, it's not the only aspect that we look at.
Sorry, I never knew what to do with my hands.
It's okay. That's why I'm holding this. But we also looked at it from a safety perspective. Accidents are one thing. Do we see any repetitive pattern of issues?
But with no business there would be no repetitive pattern.
Well, there's a business there that,
One business, yeah.
but that operates, whatever their hours are, 5, 6, 7 days a week. If there was a operational issue with the roadway, it would appear from that. We also look at the sight distance. That's another factor when you look at safety. And then we look at the intersection operations, which is a level of service. So we've looked at 3 components of the traffic spectrum as to what the operational issues would be, and that's how we make our conclusions.
So encompassing your driveway and the
Vet hospital.
Hospital is your only or whatever you want to put it, pertaining subjects right there? You would take no effect of Foothill Road or Talamini?
Well, we did from a traffic volume perspective, but
I'm asking for accidents.
Right. So accidents that may occur at Foothill Road or accidents that may occur at Talamini are a function of each of those intersections' operations. The amount of traffic that we're adding to the roadway system doesn't materially impact
the operations of either of those intersections. So whatever the accident patterns would be at those locations are not relevant to this application.
And how far is your line of sight, distance-wise? I know you threw out some numbers, I might have missed exactly.
Certainly.
Facing north, I was looking
So
at what
if
traffic's coming
I'm in the
south.
site driveway and I'm looking to the north towards
left,
west,
right.
towards West Foothill Road, we have at least 671 feet of sight distance.
Do you know how far that, I mean, your foot and my foot could be totally different unless you get.
Well, a foot's still 12 inches.
No, but I mean, your perspective of what a foot is. I mean, do you know how far that would go to?
It goes,
Would it go past West Foothill?
Yes. It goes,
I saw those lines, but I
about
wasn't sure.
225 feet.
225 feet past West Foothill Road.
And at the posted speed limit of 50 miles an hour, which we all know, nobody breaks that. But a car coming south on a downward slope, how far would that car, not your people pulling out, if they saw the car coming out, how far would that car travel before it would stop and not have an accident? As you were saying, people's perspectives are different. As you get older, maybe the perspectives get changed and stuff.
So when we do sightline profiles, one, we don't use the posted speed limit. We add 5 miles an hour because that's what the industry guidelines say. Plus, in this case, because it's downhill grade, we added distance because vehicles take longer to slow down. The stopping sight distance, which was what our first exhibit was, and I apologize for turning my back to you, what is something less. I don't remember what it was, but it takes ballpark around 500 feet for a vehicle traveling at 55 miles an hour on a 5% downhill slope to stop from the point, if they see a vehicle pull out and it stops in a roadway, they could stop well before they ever got to that vehicle.
You're saying it was 680 some odd feet for the line of sight, but 500 and some odd feet
For them to physically stop the vehicle. And the other thing is, when we do these analyses, these are based on wet roadway conditions, not dry roadway conditions. So if you went out in the past 2 months when the road's dry, you would stop in less than 500 feet.
And that does take, when your number there of your stopping distance and perception distance. I'm trying to say that unless you live in that area, Mr. Chairman, you're coming south on 206. The crest is right at the nursing home there.
Yeah, I couldn't remember exactly, but it's beyond this
I did a
profile.
personal study on it once before, and it's right at that,
Okay.
I actually was on the ground and laid there and looked like this and saw how far I could go. But neither be that. What I'm asking is, that car coming over the crest has got to navigate the West Foothill intersection, looking for traffic there. It's got to navigate the left turn lane there to see whether people are actually going into the lane or they're still going straight. It's got to navigate the left turn lane. All this is in that mix of the person coming out of your development to make a left-hand turn. Is that correct?
Not exactly. The person coming out of the development is looking at an approaching vehicle.
Right, which is doing this.
Well, they have the opportunity, they can see a vehicle and at least 670 feet away. If that vehicle then goes into the left turn lane, and there's no vehicle behind it, then they could pull out. So, but this shows that there is the more than adequate distance to see a vehicle and make a informed decision and a safe decision to pull out of the site driveway.
Provided there's nobody making a left into the vet.
If there's a vehicle making a left into the vet hospital, somebody coming out of the development has to wait because the left turning vehicle has the right of way.
And I don't know whether it's related.
Stay close to the mic.
Sorry. There was some discussion about the fire trucks into the thing. I think the gentleman here, Mr. Burr, had asked that question, and it was answered by the attorney.
No, I answered it.
You answered it, okay.
Yes. I read the fire marshal's report that said it was adequate for the Green Knolls fire apparatus.
Okay.
And we're going to ask their designer as well that same question. We're going to ask the designer that same
Yeah,
question
because
as
there
well.
was a remark made at the first meeting, which I was at, that the Green Knoll Fire Department has a tiller truck, which is an articulated vehicle, and they do not. And I did check with the past fire chief of the Green Knoll Fire Department. He says that we do not have that truck. So I don't want that to be taken into perspective, that they have something that they don't have. But now, if the fire, there is an amended, I understand.
Yes, it was an updated report, correct.
That's all I can think of now.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Kurz.
Other questions? If we could just get your name and address, please.
Ferrara, 788 West Foothill. So just continuing on the conversation of the accidents that happened,
Yes.
don't you think it would be much better to assess the accidents that happened north? Like, you're just looking at accidents that would happen in front of the vet, right?
In that stretch of Route 202, 206 between the two intersections.
Right. So not the intersections, not turning left onto West Foothill. I am sure that if you just expanded that area a little bit, you would see way more accidents. I know that if you walk down West Foothill and just talk to people on West Foothill, everyone knows somebody who was in an accident there, they've witnessed an accident. I have personally almost been hit multiple times. So it's impossible that, I mean, I'm sure that if you expand that area, you'll find a lot more accidents.
Ma'am, the point is not that there aren't accidents at those intersections or at your intersection, but the operating conditions at West Foothill Road are different than what they are at the proposed site driveway. We're looking at what are the operational factors that may be in play in the area where we're putting a proposed driveway. I'm not commenting on what may happen at West Foothill or at Foothill Road or at Talamini, because there are other factors. You're much closer to the crest of the hill. So you're pulling out of West Foothill, you don't have 671 feet to see an approaching vehicle. Much different condition.
I am referring to going northbound and trying to make a left, which I think would be a lot closer to what we're proposing, you know, in this site. I have been almost hit multiple times trying to turn left onto my street. Traffic going north. I mean, there's issues with the traffic going south as well. I mean, my son, I've seen cars go around buses in the morning. I'm telling you, it is a bad intersection.
Ms. Ferraro, they used an Oprah request. Anyone can do an Oprah request. I think you may have a valid point, but we have no way of substantiating that. But you're welcome to go and file that same Oprah request, just like the applicant did, and you would get that data, and I will give you ample opportunity to present that data at the end of this case. All right?
So another question. We're talking about the visibility, right, between the site and the top of the hill.
We're looking at, is there adequate sight distance for a vehicle coming out of our property to see an approaching vehicle in either direction? So, yes.
Do you consider all of the different entry points? Like, so there's the top of the hill where a car could be coming down, and that's the 670 plus feet. But you also have potential, right, for vehicles to be coming out of Foothill and out of the vet and out of West Foothill and down the crest and up from 206. So there's a lot of different places cars could be coming from, and now could potentially be one more. Is that a consideration?
It is, but we look at the outside perimeter. Now, we looked at traffic headed north on 206, 202, 206, to make sure that there was adequate sight distance of people coming from the south and the ability to see a vehicle coming out. Now, let's take West Foothill. Somebody that is between our site driveway and the 671 feet. But that person, somebody sitting at our site driveway, looking to the north, waiting to make a right or a left, looking for any traffic coming out. Now, if somebody pulls out of West Foothill Road, they're not doing 55 miles an hour. So they will accelerate, but there is not that same, the person coming south is already at 55 miles an hour. So we look at that. That is the limiting factor when we look at safety. So it's not that we didn't look at specifically West Foothill or Foothill, but the speeds of those vehicles making those turns onto the highway are lower. So, and as long as we can still see those intersections, that's, accounted for in our analysis.
Yeah, I mean, I bring this up because it's challenging for me to pull out of my street because, again, you're looking to make sure that there's no one coming over the crest, so then you have to also look right, and then you look right, and then there's somebody coming out from Foothill, and then by the time you look left again, they're coming over the crest. So I think, yeah, that I wanted to, it's challenging to consider all of those entry points as well as not just, the distance.
And I think that's why it was a valid reason for Mr. Fishinger to ask us to look at intersection sight distance beyond what I typically do, which is stopping sight distance. So it's a more conservative, looks at a broader reach of roadway and takes into consideration all those different factors. A very good question.
Thanks. And I think it's a similar question to the rating D, to try to understand when you go, what it takes to get to that next level of an E or an F, or how many more people need to be in the area, or when do you kind of, move into the next threshold of a lower letter?
Well, I mean, one thing, we did analyze at Mr. Fishinger's request that we analyzed traffic volumes that were from early 2020. And they're significantly higher than what we see today. But we still found the same levels of service, which gives us that, to me, a validation that our findings that if traffic does increase from where they are today back to those levels, we still have an acceptable level of service provided at this driveway. Now, the one thing with a residential community is that we're pretty, there's a lot of data available, and the amount of traffic that's going to be generated by a residential development is based on the number of units. There aren't other factors that go into that. So I'm very confident that, our analysis is, valid and will provide for safe operations of this intersection now and in the future.
So you think if you add 160 people right there, it'll stay at a D?
Well, we're adding 60 units.
3-bedroom units with people 55 and up, right? So they all drive.
At some point of the day, yes. But the data from ITE, and I get this a lot, not everybody leaves in that 1 hour. And, we look at the data that is published, in this case, by the DOT for a residential development of this size. Again, it's based on not age-restricted community. We used the standard non-age-restricted community to generate our trip generation. So, these numbers have been vetted by the ITE, by DOT, and that is the peak hour traffic that would be anticipated from this. I think even if we doubled the site traffic, and I don't know for sure, I think even if we doubled the site traffic, which would be unheard of, because it's just not going to generate that much traffic, we would still have an acceptable level of service.
That's the closest you've come to answering the question that I've asked Mr. Fishinger, I've asked you twice, Mr. Fresco asked it, and Mr. Kulak asked it, all in different ways. That's the first time that you've given an answer, and I thank you for that. But I asked Rich 5 different ways to ask you that question. And it sounds like Ms. Farrar was asking the same question. So now we have 5 people all asking, what is the incremental trip change that has to happen to make that intersection unsafe?
I didn't say that it was unsafe. I said it would still operate at an acceptable level of service.
But because we're laymen and we're not traffic engineers, we need to know that. And you need to translate that. That's your job. That's Mr. Fissinger's job, is to make laymen, me, a board member, understand a complex calculation that you are paid to do. But if you can't convey that complexity back to the general public and to a zoning board, because I'm not trying to be a villain. I'm not trying to stop your approval. I want to approve you. I just want the community to be safe. That's your job to translate it. So we've had 5 people ask it. Rich, maybe you can put that question on the record, and maybe you can come back with an answer, because now we've had 5 people ask it.
And earlier, Eric, you indicated that you couldn't do the math in your head, but at some point, there's a number of vehicles that would go through that intersection from this property and others that would make it unworkable, unsafe, level F,
I think the word is acceptable level of service.
or not, right? Unacceptable level.
Mr. Coakley, no, I don't think it is. I think it's what point can you tell the public that this is safe? I am not a traffic engineer. I am a layman. I trade oil for a living. I have no idea what an acceptable level of
Both experts have
service is.
said to you in one way or another that they can't give you that absolute number.
Why can't they?
Because
it's a number. It's a discrete number.
It's not a number that's meaningful.
It's meaningful to me because I need to know that it's safe.
Not in the yeah. That's not the criteria. The criteria is acceptable level of service, and they've said that this provides an acceptable level of service.
What does that mean? Acceptable level of service. When I go to Starbucks and I get my coffee in
Every
less than 3
traffic
minutes,
report you've ever
that's an
seen
acceptable level of
has
service.
levels of B, C, D, E, and F.
What does that mean? Does someone get run over at level F, Mr.
It means a
Coakley?
wait time. How long you'll wait to go into traffic, and when you go beyond that period of time, your frustration builds.
So,
you
Mr.
might
Coakley,
do
are you a
something.
traffic engineer? At level F.
I'm trying to.
At level F, does
you
someone
keep-
die at the intersection? Yes or no? You're an expert.
I'm no expert, but I've been.
Mr. Keller, at level F, does somebody die at the intersection?
No.
Okay. So at what point do we get to level F or where it becomes unsafe? How many trips?
Just because an intersection operates at level of service F does not mean that it is unsafe.
I do believe the record very clearly shows that this question was asked multiple times in different ways and it was unanswered.
And the record should reflect that both experts said the same thing in essence, that there was no answer for your question.
And members of the public then asked the question again, and Mr. Keller put on the record that if it was to double, perhaps it would suffer in service. Was that what you said?
No, my response, Mr. Chairman, was that I believe it would still operate at an acceptable level of service, even if we doubled the traffic coming out of our development, which is highly, highly unlikely to happen.
Now, what is that in probability terms, highly unlikely? If the vet doubles in service and puts an additional wing, could that happen?
Well, they wouldn't put a wing on without coming before one of the boards in this town for an approval. And then you could ask.
That I don't know. That I don't know.
You know, they couldn't expand their site without their building. They could expand their business, but they couldn't expand their building without coming for a site plan approval.
Right.
You would have the ability to ask them the questions about traffic flow. So, you know, we're trying to, what I have heard from the board and from the public is that, you know, we're trying to, is this intersection unsafe? And I have said multiple times, the intersection operates safely. There is adequate, more than adequate, sight distance available for somebody, a motorist, to make a decision as to whether to pull out of that intersection or not. There is no record of accidents from the police department that shows that there is some factor in the roadway that would create a hazard to the motoring public. The only two intersections were both related to driver inattention. And the levels of service, which we as traffic engineers use to evaluate the quality of movement at an intersection, which is based on the average delay. That's how the level of service is categorized. It's the amount of delay that is expected for each vehicle coming up to that intersection. How much they would experience is in a level, for our site driveway, is in a level of service C range, which means that there is not a high level of average delay, which means that a driver is not going to get frustrated and make a poor decision. The intersection is safe. A lot of times accidents are a result of the person behind the wheel making a decision or not being aware of the situation that they're in. So it doesn't mean that the intersection is unsafe. It means that the driver has made a poor decision.
I would say that most accidents anywhere are the result of somebody making a bad decision, right? But
we as engineers, I'm sorry to interrupt, ma'am, our job as engineers is to provide a roadway design. In this case, I'm not putting my signature on site plans or on a roadway design. I have done it hundreds of times over the 37 years I've been licensed. And I don't put, and Mr. Coakley knows, if I don't think something is safe, I'm not putting my signature on those plans. He's heard it from me.
I just think as an engineer, for you not to have a number, a substantial, because that's what engineers do. They create numbers based on evidence and based on the information that's available. And the 5 people that asked it and the members of the public were just trying to get to that number. So it's good to hear that if the trips were to double, in your opinion, the intersection would still be safe.
Yes.
Is there any industry standard that would permit you to answer the question as it's been posed to you?
No, it varies by intersection based upon the specific characteristics of that intersection. And the operations at Talamini Road and 202, 206 are different than at Foothill Road. I could add 50 vehicles down there and have no impact. I could add 50 vehicles at Foothill Road and it would be a problem. It depends on the specifics of each intersection. So it's not like there is some, set number that if I add that to an intersection, it's going to fail. It depends on the traffic movements.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
I'm following the train of thought from the back and forth, and it doesn't feel like it's getting anywhere, but I think there's a distinction that Mr. Keller provided a traffic report that detailed the level of service. And so he did an analysis on basically the operation, the free flow of traffic. That's what level of service doesn't measure safety. So Mr. Keller, did you conduct an analysis of the safety of the roadway?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah.
The traffic study includes the safety of the roadway as well?
That's why we collected the accident records and we did a sightline profile. That's a part of the, and we looked at the dimensions, the geometrics of the intersection and found that this complies with the applicable standards related to design of intersections.
May I asked this question earlier about if additional records for the traffic crash data from the police were if there were others that were not included. I'm going to ask that question again because I want to get to the safety point here as well. What was the parameters of the OPA request that you made to the police department?
Testified to that several times.
I want to.
Your planner is not a traffic expert.
No.
I remind you of that, Mr. Chairman.
I have a
She
question.
can ask the question,
ask a
and we
question.
don't have a copy of the Oprah request, so what did you
The
ask
OPA
for?
request was actually not included as the addendum.
Right.
Only the police reports were. So I want to know what the parameters were because this woman had just asked, as a resident, that other crashes she has witnessed and other residents have witnessed. So I want to know what the parameters were because Mr. Keller did say that it was only for a specific location that were included in the report. So I'm curious about what the OPA request included.
Intersections about 8 times. Go ahead, repeat
Mr. Coakley, you seem angry, and we're not trying to be a villain. But
Hostility that's unwarranted.
that's okay, and that's okay, but you got to remember, as a zoning board member, we're just residents. We're volunteers. We're not getting paid the big bucks that you're getting paid.
Citizens of the Township of Bridgewater who are in this audience.
Yes.
Have an interest in this.
Yes,
And they deserve to be treated with respect.
absolutely. That's why we're here.
They're
For
not
them,
treated with respect.
why aren't
I'm sorry
they?
to tell you.
well, I want to make sure that they're treated with respect because we care a lot about them. We care about everyone's safety because they're going to drive through this intersection too. You're going to drive through it. My teenagers are going to drive through it. And frankly, I want to make sure everyone's safe. That's all this comes down to. We're neutral. We just want to make sure that safety exists. You shouldn't get angry over safety.
Not getting angry over safety. It's the matter of these questions and the way people ask them. This is not like,
So maybe we should take a break and come back in another meeting when we all calm down.
we can do that.
Okay, because it's getting late. It's 10 to 10.
And when we reconvene, would you bring a copy of the Oprah request? That'll speak
I
volumes.
didn't mean to interrupt you. And if you want to finish, by all means. And we're gonna pick up at this point, and members of the public can ask questions. And I want to make sure everyone feels they got a fair shake on both sides of this. And again, we're neutral, and we want to make sure everyone gets their chance to speak. All right, thanks so much. So what do you propose, Mr. Coakley? You want to wrap up for the evening?
We have Mr. Keller still on examination by members of the public.
Okay.
Presume, or your planner has questions, I'm sure.
Well, it sounds like her question was the parameters of the Oprah were not released, and Mr. Keller responded.
He did not respond to the question yet. And I only bring up the question because of the question from the resident, and then.
We will
looking at the-
provide a copy of the Oprah request.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thanks,
He
Ken.
did testify to what the Oprah request included, which was the segment of 202, 206 between the two intersections for that time period.
Okay. So, Mr. Coakley, you want us to continue with questions? If any other members of the public have questions on traffic?
Love to have Mr. Keller get finished.
Okay, great.
Move on to another witness.
Okay. Anyone else have more questions? Come on down. Just need your name and address.
Tom Magliaro, 771 West Foothill Road.
Could you spell your last name? Thanks.
M's and Mary, A-G-L-I-A-R-O.
Thank you.
Question I have is related to when you come up with your safety parameters for your intersection, it sounds like a lot of it's based on the physical geography of the intersection.
Correct.
Okay. But you also bring up a point that traffic safety isn't necessarily based upon that, it's based upon the drivers and the conditions.
Well, the cause of accidents are, as engineers, I can't design for somebody who is not paying attention.
Right.
What I do as an engineer is design something that complies with the applicable design standards of the township, of the residential site improvement standards, and of DOT. And do we meet the design criteria associated with an intersection? So, so that's what we look at, and why we've looked at all of the different components that we did. And part of that analysis is, does the intersection operate at a safe level of service? So.
My question, though, is, yes, you said that, but do you look at intersections in terms of not just that, but like what the intersections involve? This involves a veterinary hospital, it's going to involve an over 55 age-related community. Do the types of drivers and all that come into consideration when you're looking at safety standards for intersections? In other words, if you have a predominantly older population who's going to be coming into that traffic, making these left-hand turns, going up north on 202, 206, which we've all kind of agreed on that, and going north or going the opposite way on that highway can be a little dicey at times. And so my point is, what I'm trying to say is, you know, it's a safe intersection, but do you take into consideration, though, the types of drivers that are using that intersection, whether it's by a high school, an adult community, a playground, whatever, those things do they come into play?
In certain circumstances, they do, not for age-restricted communities. I mean, you know, there can be other conditions where you would look at different driver demographics. In this case, I think we've, you know, Mr. Fishinger's request that we look at intersection sight distance, which increases the perception time, the reaction time, all those different factors, you know, are providing additional safety factors in, does this intersection operate safely? You know, it's not just can a vehicle that's approaching this intersection stop in time. It's, can they see it? Can they modify? Can both drivers modify their decision making? I can't, as a designer, as an engineer, I can't change your behavior to say, I don't care, I'm just gonna pull out in front of this car and make a decision. But I can design it so that they have every opportunity in which to make the right decision.
But my point is that you're taking a population of drivers whose reaction times, judgment may be a little bit slowed, physical things, and you're taking them into a highway, 50 miles an hour is the suggested speed limit, which you said you go up to 55, I guess, when you do your studies.
Correct.
And if people stayed 50, 55 coming over that hill and coming up that way, we'd all agree that'd probably be a lot safer. But my point being is that when you're doing a safety study, it's the unknowns. Like I said, the drivers, you can't say like, okay, if everybody drove perfectly well and had good reaction times and all that, but how do you take those into consideration though when you're taking safety into an intersection or you know, some kind of a roadway?
Well, again, I think we have accounted for any potential perception, you know, longer perception times of an older population. I want to be careful because I fall into that older population. I like to believe that my reaction times are not that much slower. But it also, I think, on the flip side, makes the average person more cautious about making a decision. Well, you know, we have done everything within the parameters of the engineering practice to be able, for me to stand here and say that this intersection will operate safely. And I've said that multiple times because I believe that.
No, I believe you believe that. But my point is that there's the unknown of the driver, especially, like I said, if we're looking at a population that's a bit older. Concerns, and once again, safety comes down to, are these turns that they're going to be able to make, like somebody suggested, maybe they should only be a right-hand turn coming out of that, so they take away that more dangerous left-hand turn coming out. That's up to you guys.
I don't think it's a dangerous left-hand turn. So to put that on the record, I don't think it's dangerous to make a left out. I don't think it's appropriate to prohibit left turns out when every design parameter that we follow shows that there is the ability to safely operate and navigate that intersection.
The other question I had was, when you count the number of people who would be exiting that in the morning, you came from them like 28 or 27, but there's 64 units in there.
60.
60, I'm sorry, they did change, I was here last time. 60, it's still less than half. Now, how do you come up with the number of 20-something when you're saying, what if all 60 people are going to work, you know, go to work every day, or, you know, those kind of things. So you've doubled the amount of traffic, if I can go to the extreme. So sometimes these numbers you come up with, sometimes, how do they arrive? How do you arrive at these?
First of all, I don't come up with the numbers. These, for this study, we took them off of the DOT traffic generation. They have a table for all different kinds of land uses. Because when we file this with DOT, you know, we have to use their numbers.
So they have a thing when there's a 60-unit development?
Yep. I take 60 units times whatever the number is, and that tells me how many trips will be generated by this development in the morning peak hour. They have the same thing for the evening peak hour, they have it for daily, and they have it for Saturday.
That's amazing. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I have no more questions.
Thank you very much.
I have a question.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Let's assume for a moment, I'm going to try to present a scenario for you.
Sure.
There, no traffic going south, no traffic going north on 202, 206, and you got cars coming out of the new development, cars coming out of the vet. Who has the right of way?
Whoever got there first.
Both cars are sitting there because traffic just cleared up, so neither one of them was first. They were sitting there.
In that potential that both vehicles operated first, it's going to be up to driver courtesy. Who's going to wave who on? But if you have a always stop intersection, you got stop signs in every corner. The rule is whoever shows up first, and then you go around in a counterclockwise direction. That's the law of the road. So if they both showed up at the same exact moment, which is less than 1% chance that it's going to happen, you know, if they did, then they both look at each other across the road, and somebody's going to go, or they're just going to jump.
We hope.
Right.
But,
you know.
So, in this situation, traffic just cleared up from the north and the south. If I'm sitting in one of those locations, do you think I know? Because I've been watching left and right to see when I get a break. You think I know when that other person showed up, whether I should be first or I should be second? I don't think I would take that into account.
Then you have to defer, you know, and you both look at each other. If there was no traffic, generally when you scan from left to right, you know, you may not consciously say, you know, you're going to see, your eyes are going to register that there's a vehicle across the way. You don't necessarily know when they showed up, but you're going to see it. I mean, it's an extreme condition that something happens like that. You know? And if you're, and say both of those vehicles are making a left, then they don't conflict. It only matters if one's making a left and one's making a right. Would it be a factor?
Thank you.
All right. Real quick, let's just make sure the public got to ask all their questions. You guys are good? Anyone else? All right, it's 10 o'clock. Thank you, Mr. Keller.
You're welcome, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
And I hope your dog's doing okay, or your cat.
She's getting older. I'm sure I'll be at the vet in the next month, so I'll let you know how we do.
I know how that feels.
Do we have another date in mind?
Yeah, Nancy, our next meeting is November 26th, I believe? Absolutely, yep, take your time. Which date? Okay. Okay, so this will be carried to the reorg meeting because we don't know our schedule for 2025, and we'll parse them out once we reorg and we have our dates. Okay. Okay, so Mr. Coakley, this will be carried to January 14th, 2025, the night of our reorg meeting, at which there are many other cases, and we'll publish our dates for 2025, and we'll work with Nancy, the boss here, and we'll get you on the docket for next year.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I just want to be clear for the public that this meeting is adjourning now, but will continue January 14th, 2025 in this room at the board's reorganization meeting for the sole purpose of assigning a date going forward into 25. There'll be no further notices from the applicant.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, can I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Wadelli, Mr. Bongiorno, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, board. Have a good night. Yeah, happy holidays.
January 14th, yeah.